it's the organization saying, we just don't believe this launch is on the right track and we need to fix it.
Hello, and welcome to the MM+M podcast brought to you by Vivo. I'm Bella Chakowski. I'm a reporter here at MM+M, and for today's conversation, we're talking about launch implosions and how to ensure the success of your product launch. I'm pleased to be joined today by Jared Usray, who's the head of strategy at Vivo. Jared, how's it going today?
Pretty well. Enjoying this unusually cool and nice weather in Nashville. How's New York?
Good. It's just peak allergy season. No complaints other than that it's peak allergy season. It's also nice and cool here today. Okay, let's jump right in. And, I mentioned just now in the intro a term called launch implosion. That might be something folks aren't totally familiar with. Can you define launch implosion for us and also say, why you call it that?
In the simplest terms, a launch implosion is when the launch loses internal momentum and it never quite reaches escape velocity. Maybe the simplest way to put a metaphor behind it is to imagine a rocket blowing up before it even gets to pad, that we don't even get the chance to launch. And you have this and it feels so hard on the people internally because they've worked so hard for this launch. What it looks like specifically, and the period, we usually think 6 to 24 weeks before the launch, you have a new launch team, all new messaging, or some major shift in your go-to-market approach that's very different what you're doing beforehand. In reality, it's the organization saying, we just don't believe this launch is on the right track and we need to fix it.
I'm picturing a SpaceX launch. You'd hate to see it fail at the pad like that. But how common, Jared, are these sort of launch implosions?
Well, I think to understand there's quite a bit of epidemic of failed launches happening across all industries, I think, in health or all healthcare marketing. For the last 60 months, we've been asked to rescue wave after wave of launches. This is not new. And I can also say that 100% of the launches were both man-made and were very preventable. They were often caused by internal issues, not external factors. So this is in the realm of things we can control and recover from.
For folks who are listening to this and might now be sort of on their heels, like, what is that? Like, why, how do I avoid that myself? I hope my, launch isn't having any of these characteristics. What is a launch that is in jeopardy actually look like from the inside for the folks that are working on it? And how might it be hard for those folks to identify it themselves?
Well, there are 3 red flags that we think about when we think about a launch implosion or a launch in jeopardy, like you mentioned. 1, leadership begins to dig in uncharacteristically. 2, all the approval starts stalling. And 3, there are some new challenges to key decisions. So in that first one, when leadership begins to dig in uncharacteristically, we all know leaders who dive into everything. There are also leaders who tend to be a little more hands-off and let you kind of go and they give you trust. When those leaders start digging in really deeply, that would be a little red flag. The second one, when approvals are stalling, things that were easy to get approved are no longer easy to get approved. Timelines are moving, milestones are pushing. There might be messaging or claims that just can't seem to get across the finish line, or even materials later in the game. And you're like, why is this so hard to get through right now? That's another red flag we should be mindful of. And then finally, when there are new challenges, when you're relitigating old decisions, you thought those decisions were probably final weeks or maybe months or even years ago sometimes. And now they're back on the table and it's like we're reopening everything. Who's our audience? Who's our target? What's our value? What's our differentiation? And you can't seem to nail down where they're coming. Those challenges are coming from, why they're resurfacing. That's the 3rd red flag. So 3 red flags again, when leaders dig in uncharacteristically, when approvals are stalling, and when you're relitigating past decisions. Even if you see 1 or 2 of these, you should be perking up thinking, ooh, am I dealing with a launch implosion?
Mm-hmm. And of course, product launches are a really big deal. People spend months leading up to them and might, experience some level of anxiety, even on the ones that are going well. But how do you distinguish from what is that normal launch anxiety from a real implosion in progress?
Great question. Well, I think some anxiety launch is totally normal with people who care a lot about our work in this industry. And we know the pressure to perform. There's a huge business pressure to perform. And so I think it's really normal for us to have that moment where like, I got to make sure this is great. I think a real launch implosion looks a little different. And I'll maybe give some really clear examples of what that might look like. First off, leadership misalignment. Second, unrealistic targets that everyone's feeling. And then when leadership doesn't feel the messaging is right. So starting with leadership misalignment, when teams have very different ideas or even competing ideas of what good looks like, you might have medical on one page, sales on one page, and marketing on another. This is a recipe for failure. It's really clear that you're not going to make much traction when everyone's pointing in different directions. And what leadership is going to hear is a lot of different opinions about what's going on in the launch. The second, unrealistic targets. Someone had to set the goals of the year 1 and year 2 and beyond when they were kind of proposing the product itself and getting the funds to make this thing happen. And they might have been wearing some rose-colored glasses and might have been overly ambitious to justify the product itself. Unfortunately, I think marketers are left in the lurch often where they have to deal with the gap in between the expectations that were set and the reality of the product, whether that's because the market has changed, because other things have changed. And there's this big gap now that you have to solve for. How do you do that? Great question. And then finally, there's this also feeling that happens that leadership just doesn't feel the messaging is right or working. You can't seem to get everyone to align on that one central message that works, that you can like, wow, this is really coming together. And maybe it's for regulatory reasons. Maybe it's for I don't know what the customer cares about, but there's something that's not pulling together. And so you resort to what often we call kitchen sink messaging, where everyone gets a part of the messaging thrown in. So you have this collection of unalike things that don't really work together. And you might have made your internal teams happy or good enough, but we all have this feeling it's not going to work in the real world. And you can see leadership having that same opinion, like, what are we really saying? Why are we saying that thing? So a real implosion looks like misalignment, unrealistic targets, and leadership who doesn't feel the messaging is working or isn't right.
And are there any sort of like flags or characteristics when you're working with clients of like when you can just feel like the anxiety festering, or like you can sense that there's that sense that something is truly awry here?
Yeah. So I'll tell the story of a client who went through this. They were 12 weeks out from their launch and they thought it was just normal pressure. They're like, oh no, this is just us launching this and us figuring it out as we go a little bit. Mm-hmm. In reality, they didn't have like a core value prop figured out. And so they were kind of repeating things. So they didn't have a central idea. Mm-hmm. And what forced them to change was that they actually had this big issue in the data that came up. And they were like, oh no, I had to solve this problem. But the problem was actually had been established well before. And it's brought to life that we have this urgent need. And so I think it helped them go from, hey, this is a launch that we're just figuring out. We're building the plan as we fly it, to, oh no, this launch is not going to be able to work the way I was hoping for it to work. And I need to really fix everything all at the same time. So I think those moments, I think you have to be the brutal facts really help, right? Like, let's be honest about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a bit now about like how to identify when, a launch implosion's on the horizon, so those sort of pitfalls. But what are the real causes of launch implosions themselves?
3 words: crisis of confidence. The leadership team has a crisis of confidence, and they say the chances of this failing are too high, and we're going to risk the launch date and all the work that's been done and all the investment we've put to this point to make this work, to get the launch to a point where we feel like it's going to be successful. They know the launches are failing in other companies. They've watched their competitors fall down, likely, and they're trying to learn the consequences of that, both for the organization and for everyone's career. This is a really smart thing to do sometimes, is to implode the launch to make sure you get to a better place. Another real world example, maybe we had a very senior leader call us. She was about a year into her role, a little less than, and they had a product they were going to start, launch, biggest product they were going to launch probably in the last decade. Really important product launch. Their biggest conference was literally 8 weeks away, and she just didn't feel like things were working. And she said, hey, the first big launch I have has to be a win. And so she said, I have to get this right. I have to get this right. The team has to get this right. She changed out people on her team. She brought in us, obviously. And then she really fixed a lot of the messaging that had to be fixed. So they felt going out. They went out and were really successful at their conference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And it does sound like a successful turnaround for sure. So let's say hypothetically someone's listening and they're seeing some of these red flags that we're talking about. Maybe their launch is a few months away and they know that something needs to be rescued. What should these marketing leaders do first?
3 simple things that aren't so simple in reality, but good, easy to say it that way. 1, fix your value prop in your messaging as soon as possible. 2, address the brutal facts. And 3, stop talking to yourself. On that first one, fix your value prop in messaging. Have you really found that central single-minded idea that you're going to reinforce in the market that we talked about earlier? And the way we like to think about that, have you found a problem that your product can uniquely solve? Have you found a problem that your product, man, it's like, wow, the more we talk about this problem, the more people realize that our product's the only one that can fill it. That's a really important job. Because once we find that problem, it creates empathy. Everyone can see the problem. You can talk about it clearly. The medical team's talking about it. The sales team's talking about it. Marketing is reinforcing it. And now we have this alignment on like, oh, this is what we do really well. And the team get on the same page. You need that problem to be the value prop messaging everyone can be aligned to. I think the second big thing is addressing the brittle facts. This is a term that came from Good to Great by Jim Collins, an epic business read. If you have not read it, 10 out of 10 would recommend to read again. And I have read many times. The core thought, I think, of addressing the brittle facts is that you can't overcome what you don't acknowledge. And so often we'll have internal conversations. This product has no differentiation. This product doesn't have the data to really get it across the board. If we're not being honest with that stuff up front and documenting and saying, here's the risk of this, here's what we're trying to overcome, that they're trying to overcome, we're not going to overcome them. So I think stepping back, getting brutally honest really helps you find a way to win and navigate around those barriers. And the third, stop talking to yourself. This is like critical, right? It's the need for us to say, it's easy to be company first in our language. It's to say, here's what we want to say about this. We have this brand new innovation. We have this new mechanism of action. We have this proprietary insert terminology. And to explain it, we start explaining the thing, right? Versus starting with the need or the problem the audience has and then relating it back.
Yeah.
And so often they can't understand the technical components and understand why those components matter. So, we have one example of this. We were working with a global group. They had a product in market for maybe a few years, actually. So maybe not an example from a launch closure, but they had a product in market for a while, and they had a really technical description of the product and how it worked. And we didn't remove all the technicality for later on, but we started with a much simpler definition of, and it was good and bad. This is good and this is bad. And you know what? That helped the whole audience get their brains around what we're talking at a high level. In fact, one of the salespeople said, I've been working on this for 5 years and I never understood what the product did until now. And it's because we got to the point where they could understand the idea of it. And then we can go deeper into like how it works. So I think stop talking to yourself and your product, start talking to the audience and making sure they understand and grasp all the key concepts you're trying to communicate. So the 3 things: align on a single value prop, have a very honest assessment of the situation, and evaluate your messaging as customer first, company second.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe that's a good segue in talking about what people should strive for in their launch messaging, what makes something good, and how do people know when they've actually landed on that?
Yeah. Hitting on this again, it's singular. And so by being singular, it's really clear. People will really get the idea just from the first sentence, and you're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So the way we say it here, good messaging should be getting a lean in from your audience. If they're not leaning in, you should maybe be leaning away from that messaging and just trying to see what happens. So the other thing I think to think about is not just the main message, but all the supporting pieces. We really believe that messaging is an argument, and that should be a coherent argument. So all the pieces should be pointing back to that same thought. What's the problem you're solving? What's the promise of the product? And then finally, what's the proof that you do that really well? Sometimes you have to sell the problem first because they don't see it themselves. Sometimes you have to sell the promise. Sometimes you have to back up the proof. It's a little different for every single one. The key is consistency and all tying it back to that same central idea. So if And the last thing I'll mention here is you need some good one-liners because you want sales teams repeating those one-liners. You want everyone to be like, oh, that's the best way to say this. So if we can find those things as marketers, we're going to equip the field with great tools, and they're going to repeat those messages. And that's going to help us really amplify the impact.
Absolutely. And just speaking of launches that, might need a little assistance, might need a little help recovering, like what would you say separates launches that recover versus those that maybe don't fully?
3 things. The launches that recover after a launch implosion do 3 things. They find what makes the product relevant to the audience in a way that gets medical, sales, and marketing on the same page. And then they level set the expectations with leadership so that everyone has the same idea what's going to happen going in. So I'll give maybe a tale of 2 launches. One that didn't recover and one that did recover. So the one that didn't recover, after weeks of working on all the materials, there was a sales training event. And the head of regulatory saw the new MLR approved key message and identified a brand new risk. And they're just weeks away. So this is like, oh no, the main message isn't working. So what happened? Every piece of material that had that message on it had to be refixed, had to be changed. All language was softened. It didn't connect to the audience generally as well, causing a slowdown in adoption and leading to like some internal disappointment with the launch. And that was a lack of alignment where the right people were in the room to help see that message and push on it and make sure we had the right piece. We don't need every single person involved in every single review, but the critical reviews, we really make sure we have that full alignment. The second, a launch that recovered, we started working with them, and a week later, they walked with a value prop they felt really comfortable with. They had kind of selected. They were set talking to MLR right then and getting it to the highest levels to make sure everybody was on the same page. And 4 weeks later, they were sending the messaging out. And that messaging, they went to their Congress just maybe a week or 2 later, and it was their biggest Congress. And KOLs actually repeated and reinforced that message in their own talks. And so what it felt like is it wasn't just internal under that message, which was great. It was the external validation from big KOLs in their space saying, this is the value of the product. This is why it's so critical. So the launches that recover are relevant to the audience. They gain alignment and help everyone know what to expect. So it feels like we're on the same page going forward.
That's good. I'm glad you gave some examples. I feel like that's really illustrative of what works and what doesn't. And Jared, I think that this conversation has been really illuminating and maybe something that folks should be more aware of, educate themselves more on. So I'm going to ask you if you could, to summarize, maybe just give us a few major takeaways from the conversation, and also tell us a little bit about where people can learn more and maybe educate themselves more.
Sure. 1, launch implosions are more common than you might think. Don't be afraid to admit that something might be happening. It's better to address it than not. 2, getting that alignment quickly is everything. If you don't have the alignment, you're not going to get through the organization because you're trying to build escape velocity to get this launch out the door and into the market effectively so you have that strong launch trajectory. And then 3rd, can you find the problem your product uniquely solves and get that lean in messaging that people are like, oh, I see what you're solving for. I'm really excited to solve that problem. If you don't have that, be mindful. If you would like to learn more, we have a webinar on this topic. You can go into depth on launch implosions and what those look like. If you're here on the MM+M website, you can click on the banners around the page. If not, you can find us at vivoagency.com. And our Vivo Pro platform has articles with some of these same points and the full webinar. Or if you'd ever like to discuss your own personal past or present launch trauma, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Jared Ussery in healthcare marketing, and would love to connect on LinkedIn.
All right, Jared, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to learning more on this topic myself.
Thanks.